So hello, everyone that is starting to hear us go live. It should be starting to go live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch on SASA's channels. So thank you very much for joining us today for our monthly live book club that we are doing for September. So today we have Stephen Saylor here for his book, Dominus. And then the book club is going to be hosted by one of our lovely former reading group leaders, Victoria. So they will introduce themselves in a second, and I'm just going to really quickly, as usual, go through the rules for the live event. So quickly, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Our mission is to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. So one of the big things we do is researching that downward trend, getting data about it, and then of course coming up with ways to get people more interested in the ancient world. And one of them is these kinds of live events with great authors and stuff for book clubs. So next, usually I would put up on the screen, but my computer is not doing great today. All of our social media handles for you to follow us, but basically on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, you can just search for Save Ancient Studies Alliance, and then you will find, we should be the first thing that pops up. So please follow us, because then you'll get notifications when we go live. You'll see all our posts for our different events and recruitment. And then we also have, our social media campaign is called the Inspire campaign, where we post about all kinds of ancient cultures and civilizations and have these different categories about what we are talking about. So like ancient wisdom, ancient STEAM is one of the new ones, and things like that. So check out our social media for that. Just some protocol for the event. Be kind and respectful, of course. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. So we really want to get your questions in. That's like half of why we're here today, to get the questions in from the audience. So please feel free to send in questions anytime. Please be patient with technology and those administering it. We usually have at least one little blip that goes on. As I mentioned, the streams are on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and then they are archived there so that you can watch them later as well. So that's kind of my spiel, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Victoria.
Thank you, Lauren, and hi everybody out there in the ether. My name is Victoria Muccilli. I'm a third-year PhD candidate at York University, which is in Toronto, Canada. My research focuses on personal names and identity formation in Roman Spain. And I started working with SASA earlier this summer as a reading group leader. We talked about the making of a bad emperor, and some of whom appear in Dominus. And we read excerpts from Suetonius, Tacitus, and the Historia Augusta. But you're not here for the lovely girl from Canada. The Sunday Times have noted that his are the, quote, most reliably entertaining and well-researched novels about the ancient world, which should come as no surprise since he was a history and classics major at UT Austin. And he might be best known to some of you as the author of the Roma Sub Rosa series, starring Gordianus the Finder, which began publication in the early 90s. And he's since moved on to the Roman imperial period, with the New York Times bestselling novel Roma, followed shortly thereafter by Empire. Today, we're discussing the final installment of that trilogy, Dominus. I'm so delighted to be able to introduce the author of Dominus to you all, Stephen Saylor. Welcome, Stephen. And
thank you.
Would you like to give our readers a spoiler-free overview of your book?
Of the book? Well, I'd like to just do a little, let's just do a CV about, the intro talked about trying to reverse downward trend of interest in the ancient world. And I have spent the last 30 years of my life doing everything I could to popularize ancient Rome by writing one novel after another. And I started with this one, Roman Blood. This is the paperback in 1991, so that's 30 years ago, inspired by Cicero's first big murder trial, the Sextus Ratius case, a man accused of murdering his father, terrible penalty in the time of Sulla. So this followed my first trip to Rome, which was, I guess I was around 30 years old. I hadn't been to Rome yet. It took me a long time to actually get there. And the excitement of being there was just so tremendous. A lot of people watching, listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. That you get there, you're jet lagged, you're sort of like, it's like an acid trip anyway. You go down to the forum, and then there it is, just the amazing quality of that. So when I got back to San Francisco, where I was living, I just wanted to be in ancient Rome all the time, you know, that feeling too. And I thought, I was reading mystery novels at the same time. And I thought, you know what I'm really craving is a mystery novel set in ancient Rome. And in 1991, there just really wasn't such a thing. There's been a spate of historical mysteries since then. But inspired by Cicero and finding him a detective I named Gordianus, I wrote Roman Blood. It was just successful enough that they wanted a sequel. And so I was off and running, writing just a long series of books, which culminated a few years ago, finally with the assassination of Caesar. The Throne of Caesar is the novel. And that was sort of capped off that, well, what I call the Roma Sub Rosa series. In the meantime, my publisher in London once had me to his flat in Mayfair. I'd been told by my editor there that Nick Robinson, a lovely man, the late Nick Robinson, my publisher, had a proposition for me. And the author is very excited to hear that. You know, the publisher wants to talk to me. And I thought, what will he want? Well, we get there, we have some cocktails, I'm all ears. And he says, Stephen, you know, we've done pretty well with your ancient Roman mysteries, but I think we can take you to another level. So what I want you to do is to write a big book. And that was it. that was my instructions, write a big book. So I sat there and I thought, you know what I really want to do? Nobody has ever, this was the time when Edward Rutherford was writing his novel London and doing another series of novels about places. You know, the city is the main character of the book. He was following after James Michener, who did this with Hawaii and Poland and Texas, and he wrote many books like this. You sort of, you start with the city itself, usually with the Earth's crust cooling and the beginning of time. You bring it forward to the present day through a series of characters. And I thought, you know, that has not been done with Rome. We don't have a book like that, you know, sort of just a novel that goes all through the history of Rome. So why don't I write a book about Rome? And we'll start with like a prehistoric Rome, Romulus and Remus, or even back to the time of when Hercules came through. And then we'll bring it forward all the way to Fellini's Satyricon in the 1960s, when I saw that movie. So that was my précis. And as I started, you know, the actual research, I thought, this is insane. There's no way to get through that much Roman history anyway. So I ended up doing a novel that spanned from earliest Rome as a trading village on the Tiber up to the time of Caesar and his assassination. And so that book was called Roma, the novel of ancient Rome. And a pretty big, thick book. And, you know, I had one of the greatest experiences an author can have. I was in my local Costco, and there I saw Roma, a stack of Roma being sold at Costco.
You know, you've arrived.
You know, along with the Stephen King books and the George R.R. Martin. So yes, there I was truly an author now because I've penetrated Costco. So I got to do a sequel to that. We brought it up to the time of the death of Caesar. So the next book obviously had to be Empire. Here's the paperback, which is a little blue to that color. And in that, I only spanned from the time of Augustus, late Augustus, to the height of the empire under Hadrian. So I got to do all those crazy emperors, all those amazing stories, Nero, Domitian, the beginning of the Colosseum, all of that. So that was just a whirlwind of a book. I really enjoyed doing it. And it seemed like there needed to be a third book. You want a trilogy, right? So what happens after Hadrian? Well, a lot of confusion and chaos. I wanted to bring it up to the time of Constantine, which is a real watershed because of course, he makes the empire a Christian state, or he begins that process. So between Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, up to Constantine is just this amazing span of history, which it hasn't really been covered a lot by reception studies and popular novels and so forth, because the sources are so thorny and vexed. But there's a lot of amazing stories in there. And of course, you get from the emperor, the philosopher, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, up to Constantine. That's just a real juncture in history that's going to change everything going forward after that. And of course, Rome is the beginning of the end of Rome, because we have the new city of Constantine, which is going to become the new Christian capital. So that became my novel, Dominus, which this book was the biggest challenge I've ever had as an author, and a lot of it was because of the source material. People who know the period know the Historia Augusta, all your other sources are just, I mean, some of them are just totally fiction. So what does the historian do with that? And yet it's really fascinating to kind of see these bad rocky years that the empire went through before it's kind of resuscitated by the Tetrarchy and then Constantine, and it begins a transformation into something very different, which will take us up to today. I do this, I've written these 3 novels, Roma, Empire, and Dominus, through the vehicle of a family saga. So we have a family that begins in ancient Rome, an actual family we know of, the Pinarius family, who installed the first altar of Hercules. I mean, one of the first actual landmarks anywhere among the 7 hills. And they actually carry forward until one of them is an heir of Julius Caesar.
Yeah, I think
it becomes sort of
featured in Livy, I think.
Yes, they become a little more obscure in the period after that. So as a novelist, I can kind of do whatever I want with these people.
Right.
But and in Dominus especially, they become an expert family at creating architecture and sculpture and art. They're the go-to people for this. So a way to follow the history in Dominus is through the actual archaeology and structures. I'm talking about the Colosseum and the many times it is burned and rebuilt, the column of Trajan, the column of Marcus Aurelius, and what those mean. And of course, up to Constantine, who actually takes all of these stray pieces of sculpture and puts them into his own triumphal arch. And what is the meaning of that? What has become to this kind of Frankenstein empire architecture and empire? So having the family be these artisans and in charge of course, of workshops was one way to kind of follow and to keep the story focused in Rome. In these 3 books, I never physically leave the city of Rome because it's a biography of the city itself and how it changes. So that way I'm able to just sort of focus on what's going on everywhere else, but to bring the story to what is happening to people in the city of Rome. So that's Dominus. I should say, I think this may be my last novel. I finished off the Roma Sabrosa series with The Throne of Caesar. And now that I've written my trilogy, that's very neatly rounded off all the way from Hercules passing through to Constantine. I've sort of told that story as best I could. And it's been a real pleasure and an honor as an author to be able to do kind of what I wanted to do for the last 30 years. A lot of authors sort of have to do things they don't want to do, or the things they want to do that won't get published. So it's been an amazing career for me. I've met so many wonderful people and had such fantastic feedback, especially from classicists and people in the archaeological field. I did not become an academic myself. That just was not my journey. I wanted to write mystery novels, but always Rome was always inspiring me. So to be able to have had kind of a connection with the actual academic world, but as a sort of a graduate student without portfolio, I've been able to research everything I want to reach just on my own and have contact with a lot of scholars. Has been it's been an amazing ride for me. So I'm really glad to be here today to talk with anybody who wants to about this and the rest of the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, you must have spent as much time, if not more time, with the ancient sources.
Oh, yes.
The typical
student. I went to school in Austin, and then I moved from there to San Francisco, but eventually came to Berkeley, another college town. And I live within easy walking of the campus, within easy walking of the library. And I have to say, UC Berkeley is wonderful, the classics department. They have more public lectures. They're just easy. They're easily accessed by anyone else. And they're sort of open for the entire public because they're a public university. This is a part of their mission. And they all know me anyway. And I have crashed more lectures and seminars. I just sit there and I never say anything. I'm just sort of in the back of the room watching, just kind of amazed at this scholarship that's going on at that level. So I've been able to have a direct infusion of of actual contact with the scholarship. And of course, the library, there's rarely been any work I needed to read that has not been available at UC Berkeley. And if not there, on one of my trips back to Austin, my second home, it's going to be in the UT Austin Library. So between those two institutions, it's really been amazing. And of course, in my lifetime, I've seen changes with the internet. It is amazing what I'm able to do now without getting up from my desk.
Mhm.
That is just remarkable. And it's remarkable to think that that's really happened only in the last 20 years. I did not have that when I wrote Rome and Blood in 1991. I had to go to the San Francisco Public Library and try to search out material. And that was sort of a nightmare, really. I mean, it was a real struggle. It was really difficult to find everything you needed to get your hands on. And now it's just one of the most amazing things. I talked about how my family are artisans and architects, and the building of like the column of Trajan and Marcus Aurelius. A number of years ago, when I was dealing with in Empire, we were talking about the building of the column of Trajan and what that meant. It was going up. And I wanted to know, what would it be like if I was standing on the top, which the architects must have done to go up there, you know, if I'm standing on the top of that column, what do I see at that year in Rome when I do a 360? And you can look at all of the books and the maps and the pictures you want, or be in Rome, and it's very difficult to get a grasp. But this was shortly after Google Earth had done this ancient Rome VR. And I went on there. It was very wonky to try to get where you want. But eventually I could manage to get myself sat down right on the top of Trajan's column and do a 360. Yes, I can see the Colosseum. Yes, I can see the Temple of Jupiter over here, and that's my view of it. I can see the Tiber over here. So those kind of tools have also been a remarkable boon for a person writing fiction about the ancient world, as well as for scholars.
It's so interesting that you say that, because you're clearly concerned with world building, and one of the most fascinating, well, not most, but really fascinating things about your books is that you, I think, are the ones that have created the maps at the front that help situate your reader, I guess, in a public-facing book. So, and I do want to say that a number of the students in my classes come to ancient history courses because they've been so moved by a work of historical fiction or a film. And I've encouraged them to come watch this interview today selfishly. And so I just want to say thank you for that. But why is it so important to include these visual representations of the ancient world in your books?
To include the maps? Well, you mentioned people coming to ancient history through popular fiction and so forth, and world building. And this makes me think of two things. I came to my love of ancient Rome. I was a child. I was born in 1956. And that was, I think, the year that the movie Ben-Hur won 11 Oscars, you know, as best film. So that was in the culture as I was growing up. And there was just a lot of ancient world popular culture, climaxing in the movie Cleopatra in 1964, starring Elizabeth Saylor, Rex Harrison, Richard Burton, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, a genius. That movie got a lot of critical, bad reception, but it's one of the most wonderful movies ever made. I saw it as a boy, probably I was 8 years old, maybe, at a drive-in theater in a small town in Texas. That was my visceral connection with ancient Rome, with Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. That became kind of just a mythic, like a gigantic force in my life. I even had as a toy, when I was about that age, a battery-operated Roman galley that went across the floor with the oars kind of going back and forth. I mean, so just that kind of popular culture and that kind of inspiration, that's really where it came from. And by the time I got to UT Austin, I just wanted to know more about ancient Rome. I found out I could be a history major. That was like, can I get away with this? Can I pull this off? Yes, I'm just going to study history for 4 years. So that was one of the things that really inspired me. About world building, I mean, the greatest influence on me as a writer, as a reader, was Tolkien. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was 12 years old. It wasn't quite dominating in the culture the way it does today. It's just reached everywhere. But at that time, it was a bit of a niche, you know. It was like you discovered Tolkien. Another person, a reader, a kid told you, have you read these books? And you go and seek them out. And the world building that Tolkien did is what I have done in my books. I did not want to, when I became a writer, I didn't want to become a fantasy author like Tolkien, because in many ways, Tolkien did it. I mean, it's been done. And everything that's come after then to me is pastiche. Tolkien was the source. Everything after that, I'm not really interested in as a reader. And the movies were wonderful because they were so faithful, at least the first one's not The Hobbit. But so the world building that Tolkien did, I didn't have to kind of create all of that background that he did because it was already there. All of Livy and just all the sources we have for ancient Rome, the world building tools are there ready to go for a novelist. And one of the reasons that I have maps, you mentioned there are maps in the books that I do myself because Tolkien had the maps. I loved reading The Hobbit. Look at that map of Mirkwood. You can get lost looking at those little trees going in there. So I wanted to have maps in my books. And it's really funny. This is back in 1991. When I created that map, it was a mechanical map. I mean, it was on a board with a transparent overlay and typeset print. And I did this kind of all myself because I had those tools. I was a magazine editor at the time. And when I took it into the guy who was going to photograph this and make it into the litho or whatever the process was, I mentioned, you know, I want to have this map in my book. I'm so excited about it. And he said, if I pick up a novel and there's a map in the front, I just put that down. And that was one of the first times I realized that not everybody thought the way I did. You pick up a novel, the map is what sucks you in, you know. But there would be other people out there who would not feel this way. So it's interesting how that works for readers, whether they really, that kind of world building. But I think that answered the question about the maps. So I love doing those maps.
And you talk about like the topography of Rome and seeing it on top of the column. And one of the things that I really felt was that, and something that I don't really consider very much, or I guess I haven't really thought about it, is there are descriptions of the Pinari family being carried around on sedans, and the description of being jostled about, and the sights and the smells and being set up and lifted up and set down. Your books are also known for getting into the human touch, about a person's experience at the time. So beyond having visited Rome, or maybe that plays an important part in how you go about getting into character or into context. Are there tools that you use for doing that? And does that change for your female characters? Does that require a bit more imagination?
Interesting. Well, all the characters in the book are me. I mean, every author, there's just nothing in there except you, really. So all those voices in your head, you know, they're all, whatever their gender, whatever their status, whatever their intelligence, you just got, whether they're an evil dictator or a lowly slave, I mean, that's all inside you. So writing books, especially a long series of books and many hundreds of thousands of words, is a therapeutic activity. I mean, it's really a conversation with yourself and how you see the world and what you really think other people is, what's going on in other people's heads. You would never know this. So to try to do that within a historical context, of course, becomes yet a larger kind of challenge and an apparatus, the gigantic apparatus of not only trying to psychologically be real when you're writing these novels, because you want psychological realism. You want the reader to actually be drawn into the characters and their conflicts, what they're feeling, what they're afraid of, what they desire. But to do that in an ancient setting, then you've got to kind of think, well, wait a minute, what's really different about the ancient world? Where did these people, what did they know? What did they not know? I mean, it is so, one of the biggest challenges throughout all of this has been to get in touch with a pre-scientific, superstitious mindset. because I grew up in the space age. I am less superstitious than the people who came after me. There was a golden age in the 1960s
There's been a whole
where we all
revival, too.
believed in science and vaccines, and we were going to get to the moon, and we were going to cure cancer. There was not anything we couldn't do with technology. The science fiction age was happening along with Tolkien. And where was I going with this? Just that to try to get back into the ancient world, that mindset. I have these flashes of insight sometimes, just to come from you never know where it's going to come from. And I was running in the Berkeley Hills. We have a beautiful Tilden Park, has all of these wild fire roads, and you're just in the forest. It's a wonderful place to retreat. And I was running on a fire road, really rocky, rugged, and I passed a couple of women. And they were a certain kind of Berkeley woman. I just don't know how to explain it. They were kind of a smockish dress, and they're kind of hippies from the 60s. Now they're older with the long gray hair. And I kind of passed them. And I projected a certain judgment on them of who I know who this woman is. I know who these women are. As I rounded the corner, I tripped over a root and just tumbled head over heels. And that was and I got up and I thought, in that instant, if I were an ancient Roman, I would make a causal connection immediately. They hexed me. I sent out something negative or judgmental toward them, and they hexed me, and I went. That just happened right now. That root lifted up and tripped me. So, because in the ancient world, I mean, the causal connection of just everything being sort of animistic, everything having some kind of identity or an animus towards you or a friendliness towards you, the gods that are looking down at you constantly, the spirits, the nymphs, to try to actually get back to that, I've never really been able to do it. I will never be able to have that in my head, and nothing else, no science, no future history. So that's yet another challenge, is to try to get to the superstition and the religion of Rome. That's probably the greatest challenge, really. So
for you, and I think for all students of the ancient world, or just passive readers, suspending judgment is something that's very difficult, but I think also really important. And I think thematically, despite, although the nitty-gritty might be a bit different, do you find that part of the appeal of your books is that the narratives always seem so relevant? For example, you talk about the Emperor Geta, who suffers damnatio memoriae, meaning, you know, all his likeness and his name are erased from inscriptions or stone busts. Some have and are tempted to connect that with today's cancel culture and the toppling of statue. Are you conscious or how conscious are you, I guess, of kind of amplifying the parts of your narrative that could and will and do resonate with the audience you're targeting when you're writing? Or is it kind of just a natural thing where you're writing a human story? And
I was more conscious of it maybe in the beginning when I was writing these novels. It has become so kind of organic at this point that it's hard for me to actually, I mean, for example, when I wrote Catilina's Riddle, which is about the revolt of Catiline, Cicero is consul, and he is the strong man who kind of brings that all down, and it's a feather in his cap. Or is it really? I wanted to do a subversive view of that, because Catilina, what did he really mean? Is he really this villain that's been painted? There are certain left-wing factions that have actually embraced him through history. And when I was writing that, it was when Bill Clinton was being impeached and the Monica Lewinsky affair was happening. And there was no way that couldn't kind of be in my head as I was writing the book. And it occurred to me that when I read historical novels, nothing dates faster than historical fiction than maybe science fiction. Science fiction is outmoded after a certain point, and it becomes quaint. Historical fiction really is the same way. If you read a novel about ancient Rome from the 1950s, you're mainly going to get a story of the old rugged cross. I mean, it's 1950s religious Christian America, Ben-Hur. I mean, that's going to be a different lens than what comes afterwards. So I can't help but write through a lens of Fellini Satyricon, current American politics. So yes, that's always in the books. And I've often wondered if I'm lucky enough that my books are still being read 100 years from now, will people say, oh, the Stephen Saylor novels, they are so turn of the century, meaning from the 1900s to they're so turn of the century books. What people were thinking about back then. It really there's a whole other layer that really shows you what it was like living in 2020, as well as 2,000 years previously. So yes, I know that the lens is always there. And sometimes I consciously do play with it and kind of make a game of it at a level that certain readers maybe will see and enjoy. Other readers won't see it at all. And I do that actually with certain trends in classicism. I mean, there are certain things I read that I want to subvert. And so I'm not going to be able to think of an example of this because it just happens as I'm doing the writing. So that there are in-jokes in the book, which are only going to be understood by classicists and historians, because the average reader is not going to understand anything relevant to it, that little in-joke. So yes, there's current politics, there's current trends in classicism. There's not exactly cancel culture. That happened a little too late in the time frame to be put to, if you want to say Gator, maybe. But yes, I don't think cancel culture is so much in Dominus. But it certainly Trumpism is in Dominus.
Yes,
in fact, I mean, people occasionally email me and they say the very stock question is, what emperor does Trump remind you of? Really, I have to say mainly Commodus, because Commodus, in the book, I have him say, there's the family is saying they can't figure out Commodus. You can never predict what he's going to do next. And one of them says, no, I think I've cracked it. Imagine what his father, Marcus Aurelius, would have done. And Commodus does the exact opposite. It's just whether this is just a rule he's made or it's internal. And because early on I realized Trump, he just does the exact opposite of what Obama would have done. This is always his true north. It's like, Obama would have done this, I will do this. So that was one thing about Commodus, just the subversion of what came before you. And then Constantine, because Constantine was such an upsetter of norms without any, just pushing forward without any concern for what he was destroying as he went past. But for better or worse, Constantine was just much smarter and, of course, a great military man. So a much greater figure in history. But Trump, just that sort of just smashing everything around you, getting rid of the old pagan religion. Who needs it? Let's just move forward. What's new? Oh, the Christians, let's do that. And then, I can work this. The Christian angle is really going to work for me. I mean, I can't help but feel that Constantine consciously at some point said, this Christianity thing, this one God, one emperor, one empire, that sounds like a tool that can be used. I feel like he weaponized monotheism in a way that Trump weaponized everything he could get his hands on. It's just a natural process. Whatever I can make it to a weapon, I will. So yes. So I mean, Trumpism is in the book in many ways. Yeah.
And yet, you talk about Commodus, or you just talked about him, and it's true. His cruelty and some bizarre things that he was capable of feature in the book, and you don't kind of discount them, but you also sometimes somehow rehabilitate him. And I don't know if it's because Commodus and the movie Gladiator, he has suffered severe distortions in public perception, but you also do it for Elagabalus, who you and maybe these are some of the jokes, but I do feel that you normalize his homosexuality in the way that you talk about the army and the imperial court and his husband, and so I really appreciated that, because it comes across in the ancient sources, but I think we as modern people, depending on what time we're living in, we celebrate or demonize these people for those qualities. So I thought it was a really balanced consideration of.
Well, about Commodus, some of the goals I had in writing Dominus was to do my Commodus, because the movie, I have to tell you, the movie Gladiator, it premiered in a summer, and I was in Austin at the time, and I thought, and it had been out for about a week, and I thought, well, I need to go see Gladiator. Obviously, I must see this film. So I went to see it, and I have to tell you, I left the theater thinking, well, that will be gone next week and never heard of again.
Oh, but the soundtrack is fantastic.
That was that was my reaction to Gladiator. I thought, what a terrible movie. And of course, I was wrong about the prediction. I mean, it became the Oscar winner. It became one of the top grossing films, a gigantic cultural force. And certainly, in to the extent that it brought Roman interest back to the fore in popular culture, it was a great boon to me. I'm very glad the film was made and was so successful. But the Joaquin Phoenix Commodus, to me, was just a disaster. Just so wrong. You couldn't be more wrong. And it just drew on the Hollywood meme of the effeminate, crazy Roman emperor. Caligula, Nero, they're all the same, really. Well, they're not. Commodus is a very different person. He is a fantastic athlete. He's an A personality. What we're told by Herodian of him being able to just shoot those animals one after another, a fantastic marksman. So Commodus, he became emperor too young, like Nero did, like Elagabalus. He just wanted to be a playboy. He wanted to drive hot rods and hang out with gladiators and shoot and kill animals. So he was ill-suited at the time to be emperor. Elagabalus was another goal that I really wanted to do my Elagabalus, because another force for me when I was very young, it was hard to get your hands on books. I grew up in a very small Texas town, and only you had to go to a nearby town to even find a rack of paperback books. And one day I discovered a paperback, Child of the Sun by Kyle Onstadt and Lance Horner, which is all about Elagabalus. And it was this super trashy paperback novel that had a very racy cover by Frank Frazetta of really muscular men and a token woman. It was clearly, it was a messaging that it was a homosexual novel. So as a 12-year-old boy, I just reached for that immediately. But it was ancient Rome too. You know, this is my interest field, so whatever. And that book is a very porny book. It's really just this pornography, as so much fiction today has become pornography, what people want to read. And even then, I was like, it made me interested in Elagabalus. And when I found out what the Historia Augusta was, I dove into that. And I've read everything about Elagabalus that I can get my hands on since, including that wonderful book that I promo in my afterword by, I'll never think of his name, Prado y Arizagabal, whatever his name is, the guy that did the recent book about Elagabalus, which he creates a historical method where he won't accept anything that can't be verified according to a chart he has. And sure, you end up with inscriptions. That's about all he can really. He said, this is the truth about Elagabalus that we actually know for a fact. But my Elagabalus, I didn't throw out everything. I kept the parts that really interested me, which was, what was this about the husband and about the seeking out the largest phallus he could find? You know, is any of this true? Who imagined all of this? So my Elagabalus is kind of the vision I wanted to make of Elagabalus. Is it a true Elagabalus? We have no way of knowing. Perhaps completely wrong. On the other hand, maybe I hit it. Maybe I hit the nail on the head. Maybe this was truly, he's like a screaming queen. I mean, and it's a transition that just happened kind of as his grandmother or whoever it is, you know, the matron says about him. He says, we thought we could control him, because he did so well when he rallied the troops that day. You know, they all loved him and everything. But then after puberty, you know, as his balls dropped or whatever, it's like he just went out of control. We can't control him now. Obviously, his hormones, you know, and he's emperor of the world. He can do whatever he wants. And of course, the other thing that drives him is his religious mania, wanting to establish Elagabal as the greatest of all the gods, which is really, of course, politically the mistake he makes, and the reason he probably has to be taken out. So one of the goals in Dominus, yes, was to get to do my Commodus, my Constantine, my Marcus Aurelius, all these people I spend so much time with that I've never seen portrayed to my satisfaction in popular culture.
And I think one of the things that we also forget about these people, and you just pointed it out for Commodus, but also Elagabalus is 14, I think, when he
Yes, way too young.
His cousin's
Way
just
too young.
murdered. And so all of these, and I mean, now we talk about intergenerational trauma and the way that things that happen to us when we're young can affect our psyche. But I think that the fiction that you've written and that is being written is enriched by considering those things, for sure. And I also really appreciated the way that the Pinari family seemed to mirror the conversations that I had with my own father about these things, where at least for example, with Constantine or Elagabalus, the younger generation seems to be at least grounded in reality, that people are doing these things, and it would be hypocritical to pretend otherwise or to imagine that I don't know, that the emperor, yes, should be maybe held above these other people that are susceptible to their vices, but that they were just people too, and they were young men.
Well, I think it is Herodian who says at some point that when you look at the list of emperors, the ones who run into the biggest trouble right away are the ones who are too young. Nero is too young, obviously. Elagabalus, Commodus, a number of the later emperors as well. They're just too young. I mean, Marcus Aurelius was groomed to be emperor all of his life. So, and by the time he takes over, he's ready to hit the ground running. I mean, he's ready to go. Hadrian's the same way. So yes, you have those good emperors who have the experience as diplomats, as generals, as human beings, as philosophers. They've traveled all over the world. Yes, they're able to run an empire. Elagabalus is a 14-year-old kid who grew up in Emesa, and now he's in Rome, and you've handed him the greatest power on earth. Well, this is not going to go well. And of course, this is where, of course, the female figures are actually sort of running things behind this. That's one of the interesting stories, is about these women the Severan women who actually end up running things. You have to imagine they're the ones who actually know where the levers of power are, but they have to do it off stage because they're not allowed to enter the Senate. They're not allowed to actually, be on the podium with the emperor. They've got to be backstage. So that I did not explore as much as I would like to have. I hope I laid down markers for any reader to sort of go there on their own to find, because there needs to be a novel about the Severan women that's really just about that.
You hear that, listeners?
So there's plenty of gaps in history back there that people can really dive into, not necessarily as novelists, as historians as well. To just go in there and kind of recapitulate and find more to be told about these things.
I'll reiterate for our audience that you're welcome to submit questions for Stephen if you'd like, although I do have many more. So just for the public to note, on this topic of connecting ancient with contemporary, you started writing this book quite a while ago. And so you must have written, because the plague figures in.
Yes.
Spoiler, for those of you who haven't written it. But so the parts with the plague must have been written long before the pandemic. And did you do any, I'm not really familiar with an editing process. I'm not there yet, maybe one day. But did you submit revisions, or did the pandemic affect any changes you made? Because there are some quotes that are just, they could have been bylines in the news that we're reading in the last 2 years.
Yes, we have the terrible plague under Marcus Aurelius that then just seems to recur for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Something is coming back, and it absolutely devastates the empire. I mean, it's a huge event. It lays the army low. They have to cancel fighting the Germans on the frontier. The Germans are afraid to come in because they've heard about this horrible plague. So it has an enormous effect on the empire. And I did write all that before COVID. It was all that was researched and written before COVID. And I was wondering, as I was rereading the book before it was published in the editing stage, well, I wonder what that's going to feel like. And I was like, wow, it seems to work. I seem to have got, yeah, that's what it feels like. We, of course, have not. In a way, it's been a bigger and a smaller event. It has not wrecked the society nearly as much as it did in the ancient world.
Mhm.
But it has been everywhere at once because of our consciousness of the entire globe. And that's been that's been a very bizarre experience for me. I mean, this is the first time in my life I've ever felt anything like this. But so yes, I had to write about the plague and its effect on Rome. And I felt like I got something that really resonated. As I reread the book, with COVID happening, I thought, well, yes, this will speak to readers. I mean, it rings true, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, there were some scenes when you described like burial plots not being available because there was just
fighting over them. They're out there fighting over, which we actually know from the sources. They're fighting over the burial plots. And there's another thing which came from archaeology. They recently found something. I can't get my facts straight, but there's in the center of Rome, there's actually this place where Praetorians or other soldiers they found this mass grave, and they're assuming it must have date from the plague years because they're all laid down there and covered, maybe with lime or something, whatever they did. So we have found actual archaeological evidence of a burial practice. So to deal with all of that mass death in itself must have been, and most of us in America have not experienced anything like this. We've heard about this in third world nations where there have been mass die-offs, right, and massive burials and things. And of course, that's going to have an immense blow to people's psyches, just being the carnage and the chaos of that. So yeah, that figures very much in Dominus, and that's a part of the really rocky road that the empire hits, are those recurrent plagues.
Oof, we've taken our Saturday afternoon viewers on quite the dark spin, but something I'm very excited about, and one of the questions I've been hoping to ask you is, my research just like looks at the way that names changed over time in Roman Spain. So did indigenous people change their names when the Romans arrived? And so I'm wondering, how did you choose the names for the characters in your book? Are they from somewhere, or
in general? I mean, it's so sad that we have so few first names to work with in ancient Rome. Marcus, Gaius, the list is very short. Right. So that for a novelist, it's been a challenge sometimes to not, because you don't want the general reader to become confused between characters, especially in a mystery novel, which you want to know who everybody is. So it's often been very difficult to kind of differentiate the names. And sometimes the sources, the historical figures I have to have on hand, all have the first name. They all share the same first name. So what are you going to do when in speech, when they're being addressed by their family, to not get confused? So this is a special challenge. I will tell anybody thinking about writing about ancient Rome, you're going to face a challenge because of this nomenclature. And of course, the women, early on in Rome, we don't really know that the women had anything except maybe nicknames within. How did they differentiate the women that all supposedly have the same name? They must have had some way of doing this within families, especially if they had many daughters. So that is a challenge. Now, later in Rome, it becomes a real challenge understanding how the nomenclature is changing after the time of St. Marcus Aurelius. There seems to be this, all of a sudden, we do have this influx of, I don't know if they're foreign names or they're just sort of character names. It becomes much more wide open, and kind of understanding the rules is very difficult. What would have actually been used, what wouldn't have been used. I will confess that I made sort of an anachronistic choice in the Roma Sabrosa series when I named my hero Gordianus. Because it is a name that we don't encounter until much, much later. And I did it at that point because I was just trying to find a name that would work. And I thought of the Gordian knot. I mean, if you're going to solve mysteries, Why not the Gordian knot as your model? Just cut right through, just cut to the core of this thing. And so I thought Gordianus. So but avoiding anachronism is a real challenge. And that's just, and I have to stay on my toes about this, because the day the book is published, if I've made a mistake, I'm going to get an email saying, Mr. Saylor, I'm loving your new novel, but on page 47. So I learned that early on with these novels, that there would be readers always who knew more than I did about any particular branch. So it really has put me on my toes as far as having to up my game and try to get these things right.
One of the discussions I had with some of my students last week was how difficult sometimes reading academic texts about the ancient world is, because the language that scholars use is like really inaccessible, honestly.
Yes.
And I don't think we celebrate enough how difficult and how much skill it is required to distill these really complicated concepts into understandable English. And you've basically done a history of over a century, I don't know, 100 and almost 30 years between, well, maybe it's more than that, between Marcus Aurelius and Constantine the Great. And it's so easy to follow. So I really
thank you. Thank you for saying that, because the author never knows. I've gotten pretty good at understanding whether my work is comprehensible or not, since I've written so many novels. But thank you for saying that, because this Dominus was the biggest challenge I can even imagine, trying to get through that swathe of history. It just becomes so confusing. It's so confusing. All the names, all the short-lived emperors, all of the fake emperors who rise up and have to be beaten down. Yes, it's a big spaghetti bowl, and trying to chart a way through that was a challenge. One of the tools I used is kind of a cheat, or maybe it's just a historical device. We know that under Philip the Arab, as he's called, it's the millennial of Rome, and he has the celebrations in the Colosseum. He gets to be the 1,000-year emperor. And so we know that there was a book, a big history book written, and I forget the name of the author, but it's lost anyway. We don't have it, but it was called The Millennium. And this is kind of the coffee table book that everybody had to have, because this is the millennium. Well, one of my characters gets brought in because the author has died and the book needs to be finished. So he's going to be brought in as the ghostwriter to do this. So his challenge, his remit, is to do 1,000-year history in a comprehensible fashion for readers to read, the popular readers, and to kind of gloss over the embarrassing stuff, especially recently for Philip the Arab having to murder his predecessors, and to sort of leave, what does he leave in and what does he not leave in? So that is also kind of one of the in-jokes that takes place, because we know this book was written. We don't have this book. I can do anything I want with this book. And one of the frustrations, and why do we not know it was written by a Panari? Because he doesn't get credit, and he's vexed about this. The emperor says, well, I think it should have only one byline on the book for to be authoritative. So he's tied it to knots. He's written his magnum opus. This is his gateway into being taken seriously as a writer, and his name is not going to be on the book. So, but by having him kind of do this précis of the history in his head, that got me through a very thorny chunk of history. And I was able to compress it into kind of just a more comprehensive narrative that the reader could kind of, we've leapt forward like 50 years now, that I don't want to cover minute by minute, because nobody wants to go there. No historian, no fiction reader.
We have only a few more minutes, so maybe I'll ask my closing question, which is asking you to be benevolent enough to dispense some advice onto the popular reader of the ancient world, but also BAs or MAs or PhDs in classics or ancient history who are confronted with a field that is on a downward trend in some places. Any advice for or how they can see themselves fitting into this world, or ways that your studies have helped you, I guess, both as an author, but in the world beyond fiction.
Well, you have to do what you love. That's the best. That's the most generally best advice I can give. If you have a love of the ancient world, do it. I mean, because, I came into it sort of sideways. I managed to find a way in, which wasn't a typical or academic way in. And it was a miracle kind of that I was able to make a career out of it. I didn't plan that. When I wrote Roman Blood, I thought it was just what they call a one-off. I had no anticipation of writing any sequels. I didn't know what I wanted to write a novel about the Byzantines, maybe. And I did not even realize that I was so naive as a reader that a series was what was happening. People love series. And so when I was offered a chance to do another 3-book deal or 2-book deal or something, I sort of was scratching my head. Well, what am I going to do with this? And then it just dawned on me that I'm being offered an opportunity to write book after book, if I can manage it, about, to me, the most fascinating era of human history, with the end of the Roman Republic. I'll just be able to go there every day and be there every day and reinterpret it and kind of explore it in my own fictional way. So let's do this. And for a mystery series, I would have no end of murder trials and conspiracies and assassinations, and eventually the looming civil war that's going to take place, the chaos, the conspiracies and the espionage that would be involved. So the plot inspirations would all be there in the material. I knew the material well enough to know that once I dove into it, it would be there. I had no idea how deeply this would take, how this would just suck me in. And I would just reach for one lobe after another. Just which one have I not explored? Take those down off the shelf. That has been just an amazing privilege to be able to just go into the art history classics room at UC Berkeley and just reach for anything I want and just dive into it, whether it's the archaeology, whether it's the history, whether it's reception studies. You said something about the academic language and sort of the impenetrability sometimes of this.
Mm-hmm.
I go to these lectures at UC Berkeley, and I think they're probably taking place at about the highest level that this happens. And I have learned, how sometimes you study a foreign language and you can read a newspaper, but you can't speak it. You can't speak it. Well, I have learned to listen to this academic language and understand it if I pay close attention, but I could never speak it back. I do not have that language in me. I hate it that you say classics is on a downward trend and that you're so aware of this because of where you are and what you want to do with your life. I hope that won't be true. I know that, I go to these lectures every year called the Say the Lectures at Berkeley, and they invite a world-class scholar who comes in. And I can never think of names at my age, but one of them from Italy, this wonderful guy, he said, what will be the future of classics? And he said, it may be that 100 years from now, the best and highest purpose will be the fact that classics preserved a dead language. And that because so many languages are being lost every day on planet Earth, just by the dozens, we're losing languages, that classics will have provided a template for somehow grappling with that issue and resuscitating lost corners of human society and culture. And that was the first time I actually thought that, it's not just about the fun. I have got to just have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are actually making a living and working to translate and working to write new scholarship, I realize that they're facing a great challenge now. But for heaven's sake, keep doing it. Because I owe such a debt to the people who have gotten down in the trenches, who have translated that piece of Byzantine Greek that was totally inaccessible to me for 20 years. Thank you for doing that, because now I can go in and see what it actually says. And what do you know? There is a nugget in there that leads to another nugget. So the scholarship is just so important, just for what it is. I hope that people do not become discouraged from following their dream, from following the thread that is enticing them forward. Please do go forward and do that, whether it's translation or archaeology or reception studies. Please keep doing that work against whatever the obstacles are, because you have been important to me, and you will be important to someone else that hasn't even been born yet. So please think about that legacy.
I do also just want to say, on a personal note, when I finished my undergrad, I spent some time in France teaching English. And when the English teacher at the school found out that I was interested in ancient history, he brought to the staff room a French translation of one of your books, Du sang sur Rome. And he asked if I'd heard of it, if I'd read it. And he lent it to me, and various other things happened. So I haven't been able to read that whole series, but I do want you to know that your work is very meaningful, because that was a time when I was lost and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And signs like coming up with your book and meeting people who wanted to connect with me about the ancient world is one of the things that set me on this path. And now my classes are fully enrolled, so hopefully they'll continue to be inspired by the content and the people, the humanity, in the same way that your books have been and continue to be for us. So thank you so much.
Well, I hope I've done my part to try to bring students into your classroom in whatever roundabout way I can do that.
Great. I see that one of my students noted earlier on that it was an enjoyable interview. So that's great.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to pop back on for the last minute of this, because that was literally the most perfect way to end this book club. Like, we're literally gonna have to take that sound bite out. That was so like advertisement for SASA. Perfect. And really, this has been, like, Victoria, you came with amazing questions. This has been such a great interview. So thank you both so much for coming and doing this. Of course, we're sadly at the end now, but if you have any last questions or comments that you wanted to say, feel free to do that. But then I just wanted to come on and say thank you, because really that was so perfect. I know David, I'm gonna like send this to David later and have him watch it, and he's gonna be like, okay, we definitely need to take that clip out and use it for something, because that was really a great, like you were saying, kind of your roundabout way that gets people into this kind of stuff. Because that's, you know, the kinds of things that SASA is trying to do too with like archeo gaming or whatever, that like getting gamers into learning about the actual history of Total War or like whatever it is that they're playing.
But you see, it's a circle, because my roundabout way might get a student into a classroom, and then that student ultimately does scholarship that inspires a game creator. So it's a circle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And even with that, it's like all of these things, you know, people think that ancient studies is kind of stagnant, but like all these, one of the people that we're working with for archeo gaming, he's doing his PhD in like archeo gaming stuff. So like, that's obviously a totally like new field within ancient studies, basically. So that's really cool, right? Like 15 years ago, no one was doing their dissertation about archeo gaming. So yeah, that was just like the perfect way to end this. I could cry.
Okay.
So really, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. Thank you, everyone who is watching in the audience. Thank you, Victoria, of course, for hosting this and coming with your amazing questions. If you want to say your goodbyes, and then I will turn off the live stream.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.